There are classics, and then there are classics. And few movies have immortal classic written all over it, the way The Wizard of Oz does. No childhood is complete without seeing this movie. It's lasted for decades and decades, and audiences continue to love it. Children at heart, and just those who love great filmmaking and great stories, basically. And this is a great story. It was nominated for Best Picture, did not win. Gone with the Wind won that year. This is 1939. Also directed by Victor Fleming. So imagine this director, Victor Fleming, he does Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz in the exact same year. So two of the greatest movies of all time, the most beloved movies of all time. This guy does in 1 year. Kind of puts my accomplishments to shame. But what have you. So I don't really know what kind of or how in-depth I'm going to be in this review. Maybe a lot of gushing, because I do love the movie. It is a childhood favorite, so part of it is hard to remove myself from that. But, you know, also, I mean, you can just appreciate it as a movie itself, and from the storytelling standpoint. I mean, you know, I think they still teach this in schools, but, you know, they do the whole Joseph Conrad hero's journey kind of thing, where, you know, starts off in normality, goes on an adventure, then returns back changed and more knowledgeable, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, this movie, they use that as an example, and, you know, all these, you know, classes, English classes or film classes, what have you, just because it is such a classic story. And, you know, it's something that we've seen filmmakers and storytellers try to go back to the Wizard of Oz stories, to the source material. And they're, by their own right, you know, the Wizard of Oz series, the novels, they're beloved by their own right. We've seen movies like Return to Oz, and more recently, Oz the Great and Powerful. But whatever it is, they just can't capture the magic that this one does. And it's maybe a little bit hard to say why. But I mean, the story is fairly simple as it is. It takes everything from the books. I would imagine, I haven't read them, but and turns it into this adventure film. It looks like a storybook come to life, which I really like. You know, you're not going to look at this and think, wow, this looks so fucking realistic. Look at that shit. No, I mean, you'll very clearly you'll see like painted backgrounds and, you know, a film studio's idea of what a forest would look like. Oh, let's just put some fucking trees in here and whatever. But I don't know. There is a certain charm to that, because it's not a realistic movie. It's a fantasy movie. So this would be 1939's interpretation of a fantasy movie, which, you know, if you equate it to something like today, like a Harry Potter movie, they're fantastical and they don't look exactly realistic either. They have some shoddy effects. So some things never change. But with this one, I think the main difference you'll see is that, in a very conscious kind of way, they made this into a musical, which I think is what ultimately gives it the edge. They have Judy Garland as a star here, a big picture of her here. Oh, hello. And, you know, previous actresses they sought out, I think they sought out Shirley Temple, actually, because Dorothy is a young girl, and, like, let's be realistic. I mean, Judy Garland, she looks like, what, 20 in this movie? So, I mean, whatever. But, you know, to have a singing talent like that, I mean, you got to make it a musical. You know, with a great supporting cast, great musical numbers that really stand out. I mean, this movie by its own right, just in terms of its soundtrack, I mean, we have such great classic songs. Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Follow the Yellow Brick Road, If I Only Had a Brain, you name it. I mean, there's just so many great songs in this movie that are like eternally stuck in my head forever, because I watched it so many times as a kid. So there's that. And just a great visual wonder, great character. I mean, Dorothy is a great character. She's, you know, Dorothy the Meek. Judy Garland plays her in a way that's, you know, she's very innocent, but still determined, you know, and still puts a lot of loyalty into her friendships with the Tin Man, with Scarecrow, and with the Lion. Though, I mean, she admits at the end, she's like, "Oh, Scarecrow, I'll miss you most of all." Well, okay, but you know, whatever. And you know, obviously the witch, the fucking Wicked Witch of the West, Margaret Hamilton's so great. I'll get you, my pretty. She's so one of the best villains of all time. I mean, you know, we've seen witches in movies. You know, you name it. I mean, we actually see a lot of them. As recent as Meryl Streep, she played the witch in Into the Woods movie, and you know, there's this very Hollywoodized interpretation of what a witch should be, and I think she kind of established that in her own way, sort of, like cackling witch, you know. So she's great. I mean, just absolutely classic villain, one of the best villains. And her fucking flying monkeys, the flying monkeys all over the place, and I think that's great. And I don't know, what can you really say about this movie? I think it's just fantastic, and the characters are so good. I mean, the trio, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, they're very flamboyant, which I like. I mean, they're kind of these larger than life characters, and you know, you see the Scarecrow like with his stuffing coming out and stuff like that. Little memorable traits to them. Scarecrow, he wants the brain, and Tin Man wants a heart, and Lion, the Cowardly Lion, he wants some courage. You know, king of the forest. I think Cowardly Lion is probably my favorite character. I think I love the performance. You know, really cute. Why'd you have to hit me like that, you big bully? I think he's so funny. And like that one part where they see the wizard, and you know, the wizard, big giant floating head, is threatening them, and then he runs out and smashes through the window. I think it's funny. What can I tell you? So I mean, it's like a big cartoon, like a big storybook. So it's very charming in its own way, and it's a classic tale. I mean, you see stuff from this movie, and we see it kind of used in all these kind of classic tales, like for you know when. They storm the witch's castle, and we have the guards, these weird looking guard guys. They kind of look like, you know, those British guards, but they're like green. You know, they take their costumes, and that's how they infiltrate the lair. We see that in Star Wars. We see that in Lord of the Rings. So we see that in all these kinds of things. So there's traits to this movie that are just timeless, and seeing as is this big fantasy, kind of classic moral to learn from, and there's no place like home. And you know, we see that the characters that she meets in Oz are kind of inspired by characters from her real life. You know, the farm hands who represent Larry, Curly, and Moe, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. And, you know, that old bitch who wants to kill Toto, she's obviously the Wicked Witch. And, oh God, what's the guy's name? You know, the guy who's the wizard, basically. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so, I don't know. What can you say about this movie? It's just such a classic movie. It has endured for all these years and more, just because it is such a great story, such a great presentation, such lively music, such a colorful and beautiful looking film. I mean, this is filmmaking at its finest, and I think, you know, it's survived as long as it has, because, you know, it is something that is you know, family entertainment that you would be exposed to as a kid, and it's pretty safe, and it's different than your average cartoon. So I mean, that's kind of how it starts, but you know, it's gone from generation to generation because it is just such a well-made movie, and it's lasted so long. Yeah, this movie's 1939, decades ago. I mean, the whole cast is dead and gone, but this is an immortal classic that's just lived up, and people still love it, still talk about it to this day. I mean, that's really something. And well, like, I don't know what the fixation is on, you know, just you know, tying to the past. Like, I remember there was one point, like maybe like mid-90s, where they were like obsessed with, like, I don't know, like Dateline NBC or whatever, you know, the surviving Munchkins from the movie, where they'd always like interview them. They're like, oh, we have one of the last surviving Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz here to talk about the movie. You know, they'd always be like, oh, I fucking hated that movie. Just don't ask me about it. You know, that kind of stuff. They're always like, oh, and he hates them. He hates the movie. Ha ha ha. but whatever. And I think the dog was paid more than the Munchkins in the movie, which probably didn't help. But I'm getting off the track here. Wizard of Oz. If you haven't seen it, what's wrong with you? Come on. The Blu-ray the Blu-ray looks really good. I recently picked this up actually. After only having seen it on VHS, so it's definitely a jarring difference. But to see this come to life in high definition, you can pick this DVD or this Blu-ray up probably anywhere for maybe about $10 or so. Well worth it. Well worth to revisit your childhood. Go on the journey again with Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion, and watch them defeat the witch in her over-the-top cackling kind of way. Oh, what a world! What a world! Oh, so great. But yeah, I love the movie. I think everybody loves the movie, unless you're some kind of asshole. Why wouldn't you like the movie? But anyway, that's my review of Wizard of Oz. Thanks very much for watching the Scatterbrain review here. Comment, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff, and plenty more Best Picture reviews to come. 31 Days of Oscar, still going strong. I'll see you later.